Top Azure DevOps Engineer interview questions with short sample answers, broken down by experience level. Junior Azure DevOps Engineer. 1. What is Azure DevOps? A Microsoft toolchain for managing software lifecycle, boards, repos, pipelines, artifacts, and test plans. 2. What is a pipeline? A C/CD workflow that automates build, test, and deployment. 3. How do you trigger a pipeline automatically? Use Trigger or PR in YAML or configure it via the UI. 4. What is the difference between a build and a release? Build compiles code. Release deploys it to environments. 5. What is a variable group? A reusable set of variables shared across multiple pipelines. 6. How do you manage secrets in Azure DevOps? Use pipeline secrets, variable groups with secrets, or Azure Key Vault integration. 7. What is source control and which types does Azure DevOps support? Version management. Supports Git and TFVC. Mid-level Azure DevOps Engineer Odd 8. How do you implement infrastructure as code, IAC, using tools like Terraform, Bicep, or ARM templates in Pipelines.9? How do you deploy a Docker container to Azure using pipelines? Use Docker tasks to build/push images, then deploy to Azure Container Registry or AKS 10. What is YAML in pipelines? A declarative way to define pipeline stages, jobs, and steps as code.11. How do you configure pipeline approvals? Use environment protection rules and approval gates in the UI or YAML. Environment protection rules control who can deploy to an environment and under what conditions. Approval gates are manual or automated approvals required before a pipeline deploys to an environment. 12. What is a service connection? A secure way to connect Azure DevOps to external services like Azure, Docker Hub, or GitHub. Types of service connections. Service type use case example. Azure Resource Manager deploy VMs, web apps, or functions. Docker Registry push/pull Docker images to ACR or Docker Hub. Kubernetes deploy workloads to AKS or other clusters. GitHub access external GitHub repos for builds. How to create UI steps. 1. Go to Project Settings Service Connections. 2. Click New Service Connection. 3. Choose a type, for example, Azure Resource Manager. 4. Authenticate, via service principal or token. 5. Name it, for example, My Azure Connection, and grant access. 13. How do you handle pipeline failures? Review logs, use continue on error, retries, and alerts to handle and debug issues. 14. How do you enforce quality gates? Integrate tools like SonarQube or set required checks before deployment. Senior Azure DevOps Engineer Tana 15. Describe blue-green deployment in Azure. 2 environments, blue and green. Traffic shifts to green after validation. How to implement blue-green deployment in Azure? Option 1. Azure App Service with deployment slots. Create app service with 2 deployment slots. Production, blue.staging, green. Deploy new version to staging. Test in staging. Use swap feature to shift traffic. Staging becomes live, and old production moves to staging, safe rollback point. You can also do a gradual swap, for example, 10%, 50%, 100%, via traffic routing. Option 2. AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, with ingress bot on. Deploy blue and green versions as separate services/deployments. 2. Use ingress controller, for example, Nginx, Traefik, to manage traffic routing. 3. Shift traffic via ingress config or service waits. To shift traffic gradually, use canary waits, for example, with Flagger or Istio. What are service waits? Service waits determine how much traffic is sent to each version of your service. Example, blue-green deployment. 90% traffic blue version. 10% traffic green version. This allows you to test in production safely, aka canary release gradually increase traffic to the new version. Roll back instantly by changing the weights. 16. How do you manage Terraform state securely in Azure? Use Azure Storage with state locking and versioning. 17. How do you handle multi-stage YAML pipelines? Define multiple stages with dependencies, approvals, and artifact sharing. 18. How do you ensure compliance and auditability in your pipelines? Use gated approvals, secure logging, RBAC, and pipeline templates for consistency. 19. What's your strategy for secret rotation? Automate with Azure Key Vault and Pipeline Variable Updates. 20. How do you scale DevOps for large teams? Use templates, reusable pipeline components, policies, service connections, and modular infrastructure. 21. What is your incident response strategy for failed prod deploys? Automated rollback, alerting, logs, feature toggles, and communication protocols. 22. How do you integrate Azure DevOps with monitoring tools? Use application insights, log analytics, or alerts via REST APIs or built-in connectors. What is Azure App Service? Azure App Service is a fully managed platform as a service, POC, that lets you host web apps, REST APIs, and mobile backends in Azure, without managing infrastructure. How it works? You deploy your code, and Azure provisions servers, manages OS patches, handles scaling, load balancing, offers staging slots, backups, and logging. How to migrate C/CD in Jenkins to Azure using Azure DevOps? Migrating C/CD pipelines from Jenkins to Azure DevOps involves moving your build, test, and deployment workflows into Azure DevOps pipelines and integrating with your repos and Azure services. Here's a concise step-by-step guide. Steps to migrate C/CD from Jenkins to Azure DevOps. 1. Analyze existing Jenkins pipelines. Identify all Jenkins jobs/pipelines to migrate. Document build steps, tests, deployment actions, environment variables, and credentials. 2. Set up Azure DevOps environment. Create an Azure DevOps organization if you don't have one. Create a project within the organization. Import your code repositories, GitHub, Azure repos, or external Git setup service connections to Azure, Docker registry, Kubernetes, etc. 3. Recreate build pipelines. Use Azure Pipelines to define build pipelines as YAML or classic UI. Translate Jenkins scripted or declarative steps into Azure Pipelines tasks or scripts. 4. Migrate deployment pipelines. Define release pipelines or multi-stage YAML pipelines for deployment. Use Azure DevOps tasks for deploying to Azure App Service, AKS, VMs, or other environments. Use deployment slots, approvals, and environment protections to replicate Jenkins gating. 5. Configure C-triggers and branch policies. Set branch triggers to start builds on commit or PR creation. Set branch policies for pull request reviews and build validation. 6. Move credentials and secrets. Store secrets in Azure DevOps Library or Azure Key Vault. Update pipelines to fetch credentials securely, replacing Jenkins credentials. 7. Test and optimize. Run pipelines and verify builds and deployments. Monitor pipeline runs, logs, and fix errors. Optimize pipeline steps and parallelize where possible. 8. Train team and document. Train your team on Azure DevOps usage. Document new pipelines and best practices. Tools and tips. Use Azure DevOps migration tools or scripts. If available, you can use Jenkins Job Builder or export jobs as YAML if possible. Consider Azure DevOps REST API or CLI for automation. Use templates and variable groups in Azure pipelines for reusability. Deploying a Node.js application on Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS. Step 1. Install Azure CLI. First, download the Azure CLI MSI package from Microsoft official website and install it. To verify, run below command in PowerShell. Oz version. Step 2. Log into Azure. Once the CLI is installed, log into your Azure account using the command Oz login. This will open a browser window asking you to sign in. Step 3. Install AKS on Azure using default settings. A. Go to Azure portal and search Kubernetes services. B. Continue with default settings. C. In node pools, I continued with one node pool. D. Click on Create. Step 4. Install AKS CLI on local system. To manage Kubernetes, you'll also need the Azure AKS CLI. Install it by running Oz Axe install CLI. Step 5. Connect to your AKS cluster. Now, let's configure your local environment to connect with the AKS cluster. Use this command to fetch the credentials. OS get credentials resource group RG1 name AKS1. This ensures you can interact with your Kubernetes cluster using Kubectl. Step 6. Verify your cluster. To check if your AKS cluster is correctly connected, list your nodes. Kubectl get nodes. Kubectl get nodes wide. Step 7. Creating Kubernetes manifests. Now, let's create the Kubernetes manifests needed to deploy the Node.js application and expose it using a service. I have two key components in my manifests. 1. Deployment, for managing the application pods. 2. Service, to expose the application and provide external access. Step 8. Deploying the application on AKS. With our Kubernetes manifests ready, the next step is to apply them to AKS and deploy the application. Run the following command to apply the manifests. Kubectl apply fkube manifests / Step 10. Verifying the deployment. After deploying, we need to ensure everything is working properly. Here's a breakdown of some of the most frequently used Kubectl commands. Getting information. Kubectl get retrieves a list of resources. You can specify the resource type, for example, pods, services, deployments, nodes, and use options like O-wide for more detailed output or A to get resources across all namespaces. Kubectl describe provides detailed information about a specific resource, including events and status. Kubectl logs displays the logs of a container within a pod. Kubectl get all lists all resources in the current namespace. Kubectl top displays resource, CPU and memory usage for nodes or pods. Kubectl version shows the client and server versions of Kubernetes. Kubectl cluster info displays information about the Kubernetes cluster. Creating and managing resources. Kubectl creates resources from files or directly from the command line. Kubectl apply applies changes to resources, updating them if they exist or creating them if they don't. Kubectl delete deletes resources. Kubectl run creates a pod from a container image, often used for quick testing. Kubectl expose makes a service available externally. Kubectl scale scales the number of replicas for a deployment or other scalable resource. Kubectl set image updates the container image for a deployment. Interacting with resources. Kubectl exec executes a command inside a running container. Kubectl cp copies files and directories to or from containers. Kubectl port forwards a local port to a port on a pod. Kubectl explain explains the fields of Kubernetes API objects. Configuration and contexts. Kubectl config used to manage kubeconfig files, which store cluster connection information. Kubectl config current context shows the currently active context. Kubectl config use context switches to a different context. Kubectl config get contexts lists available contexts. Advanced commands. Kubectl rollout manages deployments, including rollbacks and history. Kubectl taint modifies the taints of a node. Kubectl cordon marks a node as unschedulable. Kubectl drain drains a node, evicting all pods before maintenance. Kubectl autoscale automatically scales resources based on resource usage.